The net migration figures are a scandal, are they not? And why does this government keep allowing them to come?
Yes, and they totally eclipse the illegal immigration figures about which we get so agitated and which the government is tying itself in knots with promises to dispense with. But they aren't doing anything about legal migration and all of the dependents that are flooding in before the gates close on the friends, family and relatives of those who are coming in. So it is an enormous problem for a country which cannot house the existing population or look after the health and welfare of the existing nation. And yet they're coming in at huge numbers. Why are they pouring in at the rate of 700,000+ a year when we've got more than 2 million people sitting on their backsides at home claiming employment-related benefits?
One thing I don't understand, and no one's been able to give me any sort of answer, I suppose, because it does confound comprehension, is 48% of work visas now going to dependents. The government can do something about this. They can turn around and put a cap on it. Surely they've got a majority. They can bring in emergency legislation. They can move the thresholds of the points-based system. When they can see that this is a massive matter to the public, when they surely can see the strain on public services, why are they not doing anything?
Because they're enthralled to the business community that wants cheap labour and has done ever since Gordon Brown threw open the gates to indiscriminate mass immigration 25 years ago. And that's why we're having people pouring into the country to do work which we should have enough of our own people to do at the sort of rates of pay that are available to immigrants. I think, frankly, that the employers themselves, instead of us subsidising them with all of these imported figures, imported people, should be paying more to the domestic employees. And that would get them off their backsides if they were getting the minimum living wage here in Britain has just risen, but it's still fairly derisory compared with other countries. And that is the problem. I know members of my family who are working in between university. They're under 21, so they get a very small wage, and they work very hard. They are worked hard, which is fine. They learn lots of things about that. But they are really cross about the fact that they are underpaid for the work they do, and we need to pay them more.
And job snobbery is half the problem, you know, that millions of Brits or work-shy Brits don't want to do jobs like shelf stacking or fruit picking. So I would suggest that one way to cure or to start to cure that problem would be slightly less generous with our welfare system, and yet yesterday Jeremy Hunt announced a 7% rise in benefits. So they sort of give with one hand and take away with another. They shouldn't be giving more money to welfare claimants. They should be giving less and therefore encouraging them, if you like, almost forcing them to take these jobs that they currently refuse to do.
Yes, and you have to ask why they are giving them 18 months to get to the point where their benefits are cut off. I think that this is a problem which is now, as I say, it's blown the mini-budget out of the water. It's taken the focus of attention away from the economy and back to migration, which is really at the top of the list of people's worries over and above the cost of living. And I think that you were talking earlier about what's happening in Holland. And after the Wilders victory, I think you're looking at a sharp rise in support for parties on the right. And the great beneficiary will be a certain Nigel Farage, now basking in glory as a goat in Australia. And he, I'm certain, will come out of this as the next potential leader of whatever's left of the Conservative Party. And there will be an appetite for Nigel Farage's policies. And I'm sure he's already thought very seriously about this and is getting immediate updates all the time in the jungle.
Yeah, I mean, I can't reveal anything that's going on in his head in the conversations we have, but you're on the right track, Trevor. I mean, I worry, though, that voters in the UK have become strangely desensitised, that this sort of peak for populism that we've seen in Italy, that we're seeing in the Netherlands, isn't quite the same here for some reason, because perhaps debate has become so shut down and we're bombarded with this narrative of immigration being high and at the same time, oh, it's good for GDP, that there are too many people out there who just parrot these opinions without really scrutinising the impact.
Well, for a start, it isn't good for GDP. GDP has not risen despite the fact that we've increased the population by, what, 20 million? Oh, well, 10 million anyway, over the last 20 years. And I think that the reason that it's not the cause of the sort of backlash that has happened in Holland and is happening elsewhere in Europe, is because of the fact that the debate has actually been shut down by chants of racism and fascism against anybody who raises it. And you were talking earlier about what's going on in the mosques, and that people are being stopped from saying what they think about these things by laws such as Islamophobia and effectively a blasphemy law by the back door. So in the name of Allah, people are allowed to say and do things because they're quoting the Quran, and therefore they're absolved from any responsibility for the sort of blood-curdling language they're using.
On the political front, Trevor, Suella Braverman, we're hearing, had said that if these migration figures turn out to be unacceptably high, which I think we can all agree they are, that she is planning some kind of intervention. So if she starts shouting from the rooftops here, it's going to be bad news for Sunak. To go back to your point about, they're enthralled to the business community who want to employ cheap labour, it sort of keeps the economy slightly above the breadline, as it were, even though these people haven't got much money. They have got some money, so it's being spent, keeps you keeps the economy just about bubbling under. But all these concerns, that's all very well, but doesn't Rishi Sunak realise that while he's enthralled to the business community, if he doesn't stop the boats and if he doesn't bring down these legal migration figures dramatically, he's lost the next election? I mean, there are more important things to worry about than the business community.
I agree with all of that, but I don't think that the government under Rishi Sunak is planning to do anything except a few headline acts in relation to illegal immigration. That's where they feel that the pressure point is being felt most. And so they are not going to tell the business community that they can't have cheap labour. And frankly, the arguments in favour of it in terms of the economic benefit are deeply flawed and maybe non-existent, because as we now know, growth has not increased at any point since 2008. It certainly hasn't increased since Brexit, when it should have done. We haven't done anything about looking after our borders, as we promised to do when we voted to leave the European Union. So none of these figures actually add up, and I think that the public is beginning to wake up to the fact that they've been conned.
I mean, is there any sort of fairness in suggesting, perhaps, that whoever is in power, there's not as much in their toolkit now as there was 20 years ago? For example, when Liz Truss announced uncosted tax cuts because of the Gordian knot of gilts and bonds, the markets had a freak out. When a government turns around and says we're going to reduce immigration figures, part of trade deals with other countries means that, well, we've agreed to things in certain treaties that now we can't stop. Even though we nominally left the EU, we signed a deal with them where a lot of the things that tied our hands behind our back are still in place. So governments make all these promises, then the reality of delivering is quite different.
Yes, the trouble is that Liz Truss was she was on the right track, but going in the wrong direction. And the thing is that she didn't prepare the ground for the sort of measures that are desperately needed in this country, which is to help employers with better tax system and to make work pay for those who live in the country already. The fact that we've got 5 or more million people on various forms of benefit, much of it employment-related benefit, much of it for spurious health grounds when they could easily work, is an indictment of this government and all of the last 13 years of Conservative government when they've had the ability to do it, and indeed the Labour government before. When we get a Labour government under Keir Starmer, it will get much worse because they will have no policies to stop illegal or legal immigration, and basically the door will be opened wide again.
So very briefly, I haven't got long left, Trevor. What's Sunak playing out? What is his game? Is it merely to protect the Tory party from absolute annihilation at the next election? In other words, try to get 150 seats as opposed to 12. Is that his game plan? Because if he's planning to win the next election, I don't think he's going about that project particularly effectively.
Nobody I know, Kevin, thinks that they're going to win the next election. I mean, I'm talking about people in the cabinet in Downing Street and elsewhere in the Conservative Party or in the business community or among voters who normally would vote Tory themselves. Tories are not going to vote necessarily for Labour. They're simply not going to vote. And that's as bad as voting for another party. So, you know, this is really, I think, about doing what they can to throw a few sandbags up against the door as the flood rises.
Good analogy.
Trevor, thank you ever so much.
Thanks
Always
so much,
fascinating having you in the studio.